السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, continue with fiqh of the heart. And last time we talked about al-firar, or to escape or to flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the three levels among many levels, but the three levels that the masses of the believers, the normal individual, should be upon when it comes to the subject. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, Surah Al-Dhariyat, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, flee to Allah. And what that means is to flee from something to something. And to flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means to flee from other than Allah, to flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the three levels that he mentioned, which is to flee from ignorance to knowledge, and from laziness to be upon what is right, and the opposite of that, and to have determination, and so on, and from tightness to spaciousness. And we talked about that last time, and how when a person flees, that means he's running, he is going as fast as he can, and he's not looking back. He's not looking back because the danger of what's behind him. And when a believer flees to Allah, he flees to the most merciful subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's no loss in this. And he's fleeing from the punishment of Allah, fleeing from the shaitan, fleeing from all of these things that are mentioned. And that means the focus, the devotion that a person is upon. Then after that, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah talks about a special level of fleeing. Those who are the special ones, the people of knowledge, the people of devotion. When a person elevate himself into the levels of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the subject of al-firar, or to flee from, to, becomes or takes another level. He says here, وَفِرَارُ الْخَاصَّةِ مِنَ الْخَبَرِ إِلَى الشُّهُودِ وَمِنَ الرُّسُومِ إِلَى الْأُصُولِ وَمِنَ الْحُظُوظِ إِلَى التَّجْرِيدِ. It's not difficult to understand, inshallah ta'ala, but it's all things that is to be observed with one's heart. Basically, he says to flee, in three categories, and that is from al-khabar. Al-khabar is the text, or basically whatever the text is, like the evidence in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, to flee from just that to witness. What does that mean? It means that a person is seeking a higher level in knowledge. That the ultimate objective is not just to know the evidence, or not to see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, but to witness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that commanded us, and it's a deed done by the heart. And it's basically to seek the ilm of al-yaqeen with witnessing, right? As Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. When he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to see how he gave life to the dead, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Ibrahim alayhi salam, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ, aren't you a believer? He said yes, but to have that al-itma'innan to the heart, to have that yaqeen, the tranquility of the heart, that his yaqeen is something that he sees with his own eyes, something that is witnessed, even though he has the highest level of certainty in his heart. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, he did not doubt the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he wanted to take himself into a higher level of certainty, that he witnesses it. So the same thing with the believers, to witness the wisdom of Allah when it comes to the commands of Allah. So al-khabar, when you are commanded to make salah, you're commanded to observe what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and you are forbidden from certain things, sins. You while you're doing the actions, while you're leaving what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade you, you're witnessing. You're witnessing the wisdom of Allah. You're witnessing that this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that decreed such a thing. So the ilm becomes like this for the person, right? And he mentioned that the three levels of knowledge which are mentioned in the Quran, the ilmul yaqeen, or the knowledge of certainty, that is sufficiently there by the text, by what's in the wahi, what's in the revelation from Allah, the Quran, and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the person has certainty of it. Then once it becomes a reality for the person to see, it's aynun yaqeen. Then once he witnesses it and he becomes part of it, it becomes haqqul yaqeen. So, for example, the knowledge that we have with regards to the Jannah and the fire, this is ilmul yaqeen. This is knowledge with certainty, and therefore our actions should be accordingly. But then when the Jannah is brought to the people in front of their eyes in the day of judgment, when the hellfire is brought to the people in front of them in the day of judgment, this is ayn al-yaqeen. They see it with their own eyes. And then when the people enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when people enter the hellfire, this is haqqul yaqeen. So this is, of course, some things will be in the day of judgment. But when it comes to the deen of Allah, is to purify the heart in such a way that a person witness the wisdom of Allah, that a person witness the mercy of Allah, and the acts of obedience to Allah becomes an enjoyable one. A person enjoys that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had commanded him to do this or not to do that, different than those who would do the act still, but they have the struggle within themselves, and the struggle, of course, has to be there. And that brings us always the subject of the tab', the normal human nafs and being, versus ash-shar', or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated for us, or the deen of Allah. And to not to feel bad if your being as a human being is pulling you down, but then the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that you love for you to be upon, but it's against your desire. Like waking up for salah, for example. Your body, your being is saying sleep is such a fun thing, an enjoyable thing. You don't want to do that. But because of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're not waking up with complaining or saying, bad things, for example. Someone is waking up for work and he has to wake up for work, and he shows that he's displeased with this, but he has no other choice, right? Different than someone, he wakes up and he is sleepy and he enjoys this, he wants to sleep, but he's waking up without complaining. Actually, he loves the fact that he is waking up. This loving to wake up is not something that is part of the physical feelings, but it's rather because of the religious feelings. And we give the example of, when someone is waking up in such a state, but he's going to receive $1 million today if he wakes up in such a way. He loves it, right? Even though he's still sleepy, it doesn't take away the fact that he would love to sleep, but the love of whatever he is seeking takes over. So to always to train the heart to be in this level, and again to witness all kinds of things as a result of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second thing is from ar-rusum ila al-usul, which means ar-rusum is the physical actions. Instead of being just upon the physical actions, but to go deeper into the reality of al-iman and how the heart is, and the sweetness of al-iman and things like this. So it's, the people of those who flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're not satisfied by just doing physically the actions, unless their hearts will be upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them. So this is from, again, ar-rusul ila al-usul, to the core objectives of the deen, that is always, their actions are always related and attributed to this. And ومن الحظوظ إلى التجريد, from الحظوظ. الحظوظ is one personal benefit. When a person have some level of satisfaction, he flees from that to التجريد. التجريد is to be completely devoted to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, detaching it from oneself, detaching it from any desire that a person would have to himself. The person, when he's like this, he's only content by fulfilling the commands of Allah. And he's never enjoying anything that if it's not done by seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So his happiness, his contentment, everything is because of him following the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what takes the person. So as Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, فَكُلُّهُ بِاللَّهِ, that person becomes, all of him is by Allah. And it's for the sake of Allah. And he's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's always, his actions are for the sake of Allah, with the commands of Allah, seeking the help from Allah. And he's, and that's, so it's such a person that he turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course with ilm, with knowledge, to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from him and seek help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, this concept of al-firar, or to flee from something to something else, at the end is to flee to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, with all what that means, to the commands of Allah, to fill the heart with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All the different actions done by the heart, it has to have that level of fleeing or escaping. So you flee from the fear of other than Allah to the fear of Allah alone. You flee from the hope for anything from anyone except the hope from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that a person would flee to, from any other love that might take him away from the complete and the perfect love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. So it's a constant flee, and this is how this life is to be upon, and that is by Allah. So seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be upon such a thing. The next subject which is comes with that, and that is to work on oneself. But he calls it al-riyada. And al-riyada is the word that is used nowadays for sports. When someone plays sports, they say that he is doing riyada. And it's basically the exercises that a person do to his body so that he is able to do certain tasks. And as we know this, actually, it's one of the things that we need to really reflect upon if we want to purify our hearts. How physically as human beings, if you want to be the best in wrestling, for example, right? It doesn't happen by wishful thinking. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to exercise. You have to do all kinds of exercises, not just the wrestling part, but you have to exercise your body, your muscles, and it's on a daily basis. And you would take many different courses of exercises and to engage in wrestling and techniques and things like this. And there's a trainer, and the more that the trainer is an expert, the more that you would get the experience of how to do it in the right way. And when people want to really be in the highest level, they have to devote themselves. So they even have to quit their jobs sometimes to be focused on this on a daily basis. So the nafs, our own self, is requirement for it to train ourselves. We cannot leave ourselves like this without working on ourselves on a daily basis. So, and this is how we gain strength. But a person, when he leaves himself, and that's how also physically, if you leave yourself to your desires, you love the best food, you eat it. There's no limits whatsoever. You see, even, I don't like to talk about professional sports because it's, it's not permissible to start with. But you see how people, they have so much determination that they might be very rich and, extremely rich because of what they do, which is haram to be rich as a result of these matters. But they would deprive themselves from eating things. They would stay years and years from eating anything that is sweet, for example. Why? To keep themselves in shape, because this is their joy. This is what their earnings and things like this. So tamreen nafs, or to train ourselves and to exercise ourselves to be upon what Allah wants from us. It's not about to exercise ourselves to be extremes. It's not a goal in itself. It's a way to achieve the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But to think that we can attain whatever we want by wishful thinking, it doesn't work. And we talked about the book of Adab al-Nufus, to discipline oneself, by Imam al-Ajuri rahimahullah. There's no way out of this. We have to give up on thinking or feeling or believing that we might attain a high level of goodness without working on ourselves, without struggling and striving. It doesn't work. So it's just wishful thinking that a person wants to be upon. So when a person, even he says, which is one of the amazing things that he mentioned here, is that he said, تمرين النفس على قبول الصدق. تمرين النفس على قبول الصدق is such an amazing statement, and I hope that you take a note of it. Is that you exercise yourself to accept the truth. Exercise yourself to accept the truth. It includes two things. Exercising, that means you need to work on yourself on a daily basis to strengthen yourself to accept the truth every time it's presented to you. Every time the truth is presented to you, you will accept it. So you need an exercise. Right? And the exercise is accept the truth every time it's presented to you. In your speech, in your actions, in your wills. When you read the Quran, when you read the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, when you seek knowledge, right, you are training yourself to accept the truth. Right? So, and we will be tested. There is kibr, there is arrogance sometimes, there is envy, there's all kinds of things. There's laziness, there's all kinds of things that prevents the person. So every time the truth is presented, accept it, because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is such an amazing part of the training that you need to be upon, to train yourself to always accept the truth. Once it's presented, you say سمعنا وأطعنا, we listen and we obey. There are 3 levels to this. General riyada, or general exercise to oneself, which is basically to attain the akhlaq, or the proper manners with ilm, and to purify the actions with ikhlas, with sincerity, and to fulfill the rights in whatever relationships that a person has. So that means one's manners, if it's fixed with knowledge, not fixed on the basis of something else, right? So that means you don't move, you don't do anything openly, inwardly, physically, non-physically, except with ilm. As we heard the statement of Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, that in istata'ta an la tahukka ra'saka illa bi'ilm, if you're able not to even scratch your head without an athar, without an evidence, then do so. Right? So everything is by the judgment of the deen. All of one's actions. And the deen, that means the ilm. And to purify our actions with al-ikhlas, or with sincerity. That means what gets you to do anything, it should be only for the sake of Allah. So you have to constantly purify yourself for this. So all the actions is sincerely seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rewards in hereafter. And the third one, which is al-huquq, or the rights, is that you give what you have been commanded with regards to the rights of Allah and the rights of al-ibad, huquq al-ibad, the rights of the human beings, fully, perfectly. This is your concern. We talked about that before, because the human beings, they tend to ask for their rights more than fulfilling the rights upon them to fulfill. And that's easy to see how unjust we become. Think of any relationship, husbands and wife, right? There's rights and obligations to be observed from both sides. And the relationship is not based on rights, because it's based on a higher level, which is وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. You live with them with goodness, with matters of goodness, not just the rights and things like this. But again, as human beings, the greed of the human beings makes the person, he wants to make sure that his rights are fulfilled, and makes the person blind from the fact that he's not fulfilling the rights of his spouse, because he wants his rights to be fulfilled. That's the greed of the human beings. So to focus on fulfilling the rights of others, and whether people, they fulfill their rights towards him or not, it's irrelevant. That's al-akhlaq. This is manners. Right? Because we talked about that before. Al-akhlaq, or manners, in the deen of Islam is not about, it's not mu'awada, it's not a reward. You're nice to me, so I'm going to be nice to you. That's how human beings, they act. But what if he's not nice to you? Does that mean that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you? Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered you to be nice? Like, for example, if a wife, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered her to obey her husband, to be nice to her husband. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered the husband to be kind to the wife. Okay, she's, unless in physical situations when she's disobedient, that means, disrupting the household. But imagine in just the normal things that the people face every day. So if she's not fulfilling any of the rights, he's still commanded to fulfill his rights. Unless things, that's why it requires knowledge. So fulfilling the rights and to purify this, requires exercise for the person to fulfill the rights of others. And this is, it's difficult, and that's why it requires riyada. It's difficult, so that's why it requires to exercise. And it's like you look at it, anything that requires exercise. If you're someone that don't exercise, right, and you see someone reach the high level of strength in a certain sport or whatever, for you to attain this overnight, it's impossible. It's not just that it's difficult, it's impossible. So someone lifting, heavy weight, and that happened through the years of exercise. So for you to think that you can do it overnight, it's not going to work. So the same thing with these types of actions. Even though overnight, immediately, we can still fulfill the commands of Allah, right? But to take ourselves to high levels, that requires for us to be patient with ourselves. But as long as we are exercising and we are taking the nafs, oneself, one step after the other, and never to give up and never to lose hope, if it doesn't, the nafs does not, one's being does not follow suit in every matter, just don't give up on it. Be patient with it and constantly repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala till the matters change by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Stop here inshallah ta'ala because of the time, and I hope it's clear, and it's is a must really, wallahi, whether a person is seeking knowledge or making salah or ibadah or anything like this. These meanings are relevant to every action that we do. Barakallahu feekum. We'll stop here inshallah and we go to the next class. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.